We are live.
Hello, thank you everybody for joining us this morning or evening, depending on where you're at, for a session on CI and CD for documentation. I actually myself am very excited about this talk. It's in the area where not only have we worked to implement processes within CloudBees, but I've always been interested. Today we have Olivier Jacques, a distinguished technologist and a technology enthusiast like myself. Olivier specializes in applying DevOps patterns across software engineering and operations, but as we'll find out today, also applying those practices in non-standard and less technical areas. Olivier is joined by Laurent Gilles. He started his DevOps journey 10 years ago, starting with creating CI pipelines. He's now shifted into a DevOps mindset and shifted the DevOps mindset, across DXC company where he and Olivier work. And he will join today again in talking about how they managed to apply a documentation as code model to the work that they do. Olivier, Laurent, welcome. I'll hand it over to you. Have a great session.
Thank you so much, Brian. So thank you. And today, really, Laurent and I are really excited about being able to talk during this 5 years anniversary conference about documentation as code and how we do it, and more specifically, CI and CD for documentation. So short intro, I think you went through the intro and it was really good. Nothing to add, just that I guess documentation as code has been really an interesting topic, which is inspiring not only for the geeks in the room and the developers, but also for all kind of the audience. And we are going to be able to share what we found out. And Laurent?
So hello everybody. So yes, I'm also working at DXC, and today I hope we'll convince you to move to documentation as code, and I hope we'll see how easy it is to implement it.
All right, thank you, Laurent. So first, a few words about our company, DXC Technology. So it's a global IT service delivery company, 20 billion, a little bit less than 20 billion worth of revenues with 6,000 customers and 138 awesome employees across 70 countries. So big in many dimensions, I guess, but also really a place where it's nice working and doing technology. Now, back to this presentation. So really this presentation is an experience report because we have learned so much from this format throughout the years. We believe that experience reports are the best ways to convince and also to explain, because we just go through the journey ourselves. So, and this presentation is really the quest for our great documentation. So previously, if we look at our story, our documentation was the last thing that we would do and that we would work on. It had spelling issues and mistakes, and sometimes we were using the passive voice and sometimes the active voice, it actually was often inaccurate. The people reading the documentation could find issue, but the only way that they were able to fix those issues as actually practitioner reading the doc and actually using the service was to send an email to the contact person at the bottom of the documentation. So, also the other challenge that we had is that previously, although documentation was massive for us, we could not work on the same piece of documentation at the same time, at the same place. So editing the same paragraph was actually a source of conflict. And last but not least, links would break on us. So if you had the link to another external site or to another documentation site, then without us changing anything, the documentation could actually break. Now, today, in our quest of castles and unicorns and princesses and the great world of documentation as code, it's a very different situation than prior. So we have one service catalog and 174 services that are documented. Our readers can now contribute to the documentation using the pull request workflow, the merge request workflow. For us, it's on GitHub, so it's the pull request workflow. We can report bugs and fix them, which is like kind of new for documentation. And documentation changes, they go through a very well-known process, and they go through tests and gates, and we validate the documentation before it gets merged or validated. So although the documentation is bigger and than ever, it's also more thorough and precise than ever, which is like really interesting for us. It has the same look and feel, and we all write in the same, using the same style. So as I said, we do a lot of documentation. We have a big service catalog, which is kind of the entry point. And then we have a lot of services that we documented, 174 services, which amounts to globally maintaining all of that 600 contributors. We like to separate documentation in two pieces, really. The first one is the service catalog. So the service catalogs, think of it as kind of the catalog of all of the services that we offer, right? So it's a marketing type of site, catalog site with a mix of, plain HTML and CSS with highlights and videos. So the format is very, I guess, presented in a way that is kind of, appealing. And we were able to do very custom format with that. And for that, we used Hugo, which Laurent is going to share about. Then we have all of our services. So this is really the bulk of the documentation. So with our services, the point here was to make sure that the tech writers, the developers, the QA folks were able to contribute to the documentation without thinking about HTML or CSS, right? So we try to make it as close to Markdown as possible. And for that, we have used MKDocs and with a theme which is called the material theme. And we customized it, but bottom line, what MKDocs gives us is a very simple structure, extremely close to Markdown, which is, as you know, the very simple way of formatting text that you probably are very familiar with. But what we do is that we have a number of, the layout is very simple and based on the folder structure of our Git repository. So at the top, we have a menu bar, which are based on all of the top folders that we have in our documentation site. On the left side, you can see the list of entries. So it's another level of hierarchy, which is really the table of content, which is made of each of the Markdown files that we have. So in this example, if you can read getting started examples, each of those are actual Markdown files. And on the right side, we have the table of content within each of the Markdown files. So this is really the table of content of that one file. And in the middle, finally, the content. Last capability of this MKDocs framework, which is really nice, is that you have instant search. So essentially start typing and you have auto-completion, and it's very easy to find the documentation that you are looking for. Now, we are not alone in doing documentation as code and CI and CD for documentation as code, as Laurent is going to show. So DXC is doing that. Microsoft is doing that for their docs.microsoft.com website. In fact, if you look at that, you will see that they are big on GitHub, but the big reason that they are big, that Microsoft is big on GitHub, is the documentation. This is really a lot of contributors. GitHub as well, obviously, docs.github.com, which has been made open source lately. GitLab, not to forget, and AWS. I mean, there are many companies that are doing documentation as code, but you may not realize it. And they do that because, and we do that also because it's fast, meaning that you're really browsing this kind of documentation because it generates static website is like really fast. And comparing to WordPress or Drupal or Confluence Wiki type of solutions, there is no infrastructure to maintain. It can be as simple as a S3 bucket or GitHub pages or GitLab pages. And it's also more secure because there is no database to hack. I mean, if you have ever maintained a WordPress site, you will know that WordPress sites are really a target for attacks. So it's really fast and secure. It's also easier to contribute to because right within the documentation, you can have a button to click and start a pull request and to keep up to date. So what you get is that the readers of the documentation are now also the actors because they see this, they can find a mistake, and then they can even suggest a solution, right, which is going to go through the pull request mechanism. It allows us to have battle-tested documentation. We can have very thorough documentation. We can have all gates that we want, which Laurent is going to go through. We can engineer this documentation. So we can have a backlog of things to do. We can have bugs. We can have automated tests against this documentation. We can automatically deploy to a website, to PDF, to all kind of targets, which again makes it really, really interesting. And last but not least, we can monitor this documentation. So I guess this is more the ops aspect of it. But think of it not as in monitoring availability, but monitoring the reader journey. So people who go through each page, or what is the journey when they look for their information. We can see the flow with frameworks such as Google Analytics or even the open source alternative Matomo. We can see the flow, we can see how much time they spend on each page, and if they struggle, right, which is really interesting compared to other type of documentation set. Now, really our challenges so far have been about common look and feel, which I think we have resolved, common voice, same thing, dry, so don't repeat yourself. When we describe the capability of a service in one place, there is no, I mean, why repeat it in another place and do a copy paste? Instead, what about using the Git capabilities to have additional, macros, if you want, or pieces of information that we can reuse across the various documentation sites and never repeat ourselves. Another challenge that I think we have solved, and Laurent is going to talk about it, are diagrams. How do you edit diagrams but also keep them live and up to date? And also, when something changes in a diagram, can you point to the fact that this arrow is going from here to there instead of the other way around? And can you have a pull request mechanism to change the arrow for that? So yes, we can do that, and we'll show you. Testing against broken links, we can do that as well, and publication is another topic. And just really this video, which may look to you as just a series of static images, but it's really a visualization of our service catalog, repository documentation, and as it evolves, as people contribute to it. And in summary, we can really build a lot of good documentation. We can manage conflicts in addition. We can do that at scale. We have lots of people writing documentation and contributing into it. And we can make sure that over time, this documentation stays fresh, doesn't break over time, right? So that's really looks like code to us, and that's why we take advantage of the CI and CD paradigms. Speaking of which, CI and CD for documentation is really about doing CI spell checking, checking for approved acronyms or custom dictionaries, having one voice so that we can all talk and use the active voice if this is what you prefer. Periodically checking for dead links. So that's really kind of preparing to be able to publish, right? Continuously integrating the content and doing checks. And the CD aspect is really about automation of the publication. So how do we automate okay, now we have something that was approved and reviewed. How can we publish that? So all of these recipes are going to be shared by Laurent. We're going to head over, who is going to share with you, how to do that. Laurent?
So hi. During the second part of this talk, I will give you a brief overview of the state of the art regarding CI and CD tools for documentations. So let's start with the development environment. Most of you are probably developers, and you probably have your favorites integrated development environment like IntelliJ, Eclipse, or VS Code. In our side, we chosen VS Code, and as all the others environment, you can have some extensions. So you can easily find extensions for Markdown or for all the tools you need to use around your documentation as code. So Markdown, once again, is just another language. It's simpler than Python, for example, but it's still a language. There is a syntax, there is some things to know, and in this area, we have the same kind of tool set. For example, if we talk about a traditional language like Python, you will probably want to perform some code quality just to ensure that all your developers respect the same standards and use the same kind of formatting when they develop. We have also this kind of tools with Markdown. We have the Markdown lint, which is made to check the syntax. So you can enforce some rules in order to be sure that, for example, you have 2 lines between a title and the first word you type or something like this. There are also some other tools like Draw.io. I really like this tool because this tool allows you to draw directly inside your editor. So there is an extension for Visual Studio Code, but if you don't have Visual Studio Code, probably you have an extension for your editor, or you can use it online because basically Draw.io is an online editor. It was renamed diagram.net. And it allows you to create diagram. But what is powerful with the integration with Visual Studio Code is that if you decide to draw a picture, you just have to name it .draw.png. And as you do that, your web server will understand this file as a picture, so it will just display it. But as the Draw.io code is already embedded inside the picture, when you open this file inside your editor, your editor will understand that this is a Draw.io file, and it will propose you the workspace to modify it. So it's really integrated and it's easy to use. The drawback with that is just that it's binary, so it's really hard to review when you perform a pull request. But there is plant.uml. So if you want to write some good diagram for UML diagram, you can use plant.uml. And the advantage of this tool, even if I find it harder to use because it's a lot of syntax, at the same time, these difficulties allow you to perform some pull request review. So if you want to change the sense of an arrow, you just have to review the pull request, and you will see inside the text that the arrow changes. So, okay, harder to write, but easier to review. And the last tool, which is really good, that is the one we use for this slide deck. It's not a PowerPoint, it's just a MARP slide deck. So MARP is an extension of Markdown, which allow you to create some slides. Previously, we used Reveal.js, but the drawback with Reveal.js is that we have to integrate a lot of HTML or CSS inside our slides. And once again, we want to have something like the closest as possible from Markdown. We want to have it easy, and our contributors need to be able to rapidly and easily change things. So we decided to move to MARP, as MARP is just Markdown. There is nothing more. There is advanced features, so if you want to customize a template, etc., you can. But if you don't want, you can do this kind of slides in a basic way. You also have some online editors. Recently, GitHub released the Codespace editor. So to create this slide deck, we use it. So we play with it as a beta version, and it's pretty good for 2 reasons. The first one is it's online, so you don't have to have a computer. A powerful computer. You don't have to install anything on your computer. You just have to use it. And the second part is about the development environment. So Olivier started to work with it, and he created an environment which spin up a VS Code editor for us, and he started to integrate some extensions. And as he did that, when I came to the project and spin up my own VS Code editor, GitHub just install the extensions for me. So I had the same environment than Olivier, and I was able to start to code without installing anything. Olivier already did it for me. So you can share the extension across different development environments. And this is really, really powerful, just to be sure that you have the same version, etc. Regarding the way to create a static website. So we started with Jekyll 1 year ago or 2 years ago. The first website we made was Jekyll. But the problem with Jekyll is that the syntax is really hard. It's Ruby. So when you want to install Ruby on your Windows and spin up your website, it's just hard. And so it doesn't make the contribution easy. Nobody can contribute because it was just hard to install it. So we decided to look for some other tools, and we moved to Hugo. So Hugo is a pretty good tool and it's powerful. You can do a lot of things. You can create several advanced templates. It's based on Go template, so it's really powerful and fast. But the problem is that it's also hard to use. Creating a template to display a page can be very, very difficult. And so once again, if we want our contributors to onboard, we need to make the life easy for them. So we moved to MKDocs. MKDocs is the most simple environment I found. You just need to have MKDocs installed on your laptop. It's installed with Python. And once it's done, you just have to create one folder and one configuration file. And that's it. You just write mkdoc serve and your web page is alive. So it's really, really simple, but it's also extendable. So you have a material theme, which is allow you to have a nice UI, but you can find a lot of plugins to make good things like, for example, the one Olivier showed you about the Git committers. So in order to make simple but efficient website, I will just advise for MKDocs. And once again, if you want to create some slides, you can use MARP as it is. You don't have to generate a static website. MARP allow you to generate just an HTML file or a PDF one, etc. So just write your index.markdown, use MARP to convert it in HTML, and you have what you are seeing. Regarding the orchestration, the orchestration tools are the same than in your usual CI/CD pipeline, just because, once again, Markdown is just another language. So you can use either GitHub Actions. This is what we did for this presentation. But you can also use GitLab CI, Jenkins, AWS Code Pipeline, or Azure DevOps. It's up to you. Just keep your favorite orchestrator and use it to produce your documentation. So as Olivier said, when you write a documentation and you reference outside link, sometimes the link change. So your documentation it just broke because of a broken link. So to avoid this, we use a linter. One good linter is GitHub super linter. And when they said super linter, it's really super linter. It embeds something like 10 or 15 different linters in Python, in C#, in Markdown, so whatever you want, it's inside it. So for this documentation, we use it just to play. But if you need something simpler, you can just use Markdown linter. I make some research about linters for Markdown, and it seems that this is a reference. A lot of things are based on this one. So just use it. It's really easy to use. You put it inside your pipeline, and you can see if you correctly format your code or not. And regarding the extension for your VS Code editor, you can also find an extension for this. And the advantage is that you can check your lint, your code before commit and push. So you can do it locally, verify that you completely meet the team coding standard, and then push your code. Regarding the spell checker, so useful tool, especially for me, which is not a native English speaker, as you can probably listen. You can find plenty of tools, but once again, you can find also some predefined tools for you. For example, spell check GitHub Actions. This is something which is free. You can use it from the GitHub Marketplace, and it allows you to spell check your code. And if you need to have some exception, for example, here we can see DXC. So DXC was raised as an issue. Indeed, the English dictionary doesn't know DXC as a word. You have an ignore list, so you can add it to the ignore list in order to make some exceptions. You can find this spell checker as a CLI because basically the GitHub Actions embed the CLI, so you can use it on your bash or on your shell if you want. And you can find some extension for editor. So once again, you can check your code, verify that the words are okay, just before commit and push to GitHub. So there is plenty of tools that will help you to check your word. Regarding the link, you can check for the broken link with the Markdown linter. So if something is broken, it will just raise an issue and you will be able to fix it rapidly. When you write a documentation, you may have multiple contributors, and each contributor has his own way to write sentence. And with Veil, you can define some rules which will allow you to have one normalized way to write documentation. For example, Olivier talked about active way comparing to passive one. So you can use this tool, and it will allow you to have an homogeneous documentation with the same kind of wording across the full documentation. To publish your website, you have multiple solutions. For example, you can use GitHub Pages, as we did here, but once again, you can remain in your favorite way. So you can use GitLab, Netlify, AWS S3 bucket, or again Azure storage, or whatever you want, whatever you used to use. It can be used as soon as this is a web page that you host somewhere. So now we created this cool documentation. So we work in our team, and we created it with a nice UI, with a nice pipeline. So a good mindset behind this. But in order to spread it to the company, in order to make it easy for everybody to use it, we use a GitHub template. So as already said, we are on GitHub. And doing this allows us to just create a template with the good CSS, so the good format. So every website will have the same style sheet. We'll have the same pipeline. So we prepare the pipeline for the different contributors. And people just had to create a repository from this template. And once done, they are up and ready. They can just start to work on it, and their website is okay. Of course, you can do the same thing with GitLab and probably with all other source control management system. So thank you to everybody. I hope we managed to convince you to move to documentation as code if you don't already do it. And I also hope that you see how easy it is to use it.
Yes, thank you, Laurent and Brian. So I hope this was convincing also to you. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely convincing, absolutely convincing. And what I love is that, excuse me, I love the focus on the real and the tactical, right? What tools we can use in any given situation, as opposed to just a high level conceptual. I'm curious, we have a few minutes, so I'd like to ask a couple of questions. First, I love, Olivier, that, you call out in your bio experience applying DevOps practices to non-technical, or as I said, non-standard areas. And, I suppose one of the challenges there, though, is when you apply it to non-technical areas, you have to take on this extra step of getting non-technical people to buy in. And I'm curious, when we talk about documentation as code, well, absolutely, I think it's easy to get engineers to do technical documentation in this manner. Have you applied it, outside of that? And if so, are there any tips in getting, your training, possibly your professional services or marketing people involved in documentation as code?
Yes, that's a great question. So there are two things there. So first, it can be challenging, as you said, because, well, it's scary. Even using Git is something that's not easy, right? So there are ways to go around that. Now, I guess our biggest success was to have someone from the head of marketing to actually do a pull request against a blog post that we wanted to post. It's actually open source. The way to convince is that I think, in my opinion, is that it's to show that all of the benefits, or what we shared about the links, getting like dead after sometimes, and making sure it's fresh and all that. So we can list all of the benefits. And I think the other way to convince that I've used, I have to admit, is that it's to say that you are not alone. I mean, it's not something that we are inventing. It's not a practice that we come up like magic. No, actually, other companies. So we do it, but Microsoft, Amazon Web Services do that, Google's and the like. So it's not. It does actually solve a problem. And I think the big thing is to say, okay, even Microsoft, the maintainer, inventor of Word and SharePoint, they are doing it this way for their documentation, technical documentation. So there must be a reason, and then you can talk about the reasons.
Perfect. Thanks. And then I guess I have time for one more question. And Laurent, I'm going to ask you. So you shared a range of tools for drawing, for manipulating text, etc. And forgive me if I missed this, but what is the preferred solution? Either your favorite solution, or what is just the lightest weight tool set for a person to get started with to implement this. And I think we all wish that there was just something we could download out of the box, point it to the repo. It has drawing and text capabilities and triggers off orchestration. I don't think we're there yet. So can you share your thoughts on the tool chain that someone should start with?
So, okay, just before starting to work on documentation as code, I was just a developer on some other languages. So move to documentation as code wasn't really difficult because I just use the same tool chain. So I used to code with VS Code. I didn't change. I used to use GitLab. Jenkins.
Okay.
I didn't change. And I used to use GitHub. I didn't change. The only things I changed is what is inside the pipeline itself. So instead of having a Python linter, I just use a Markdown linter. Instead of having a test on Python with I don't know which framework, I just use something like Markdown linter or Spade Checker, and this is just the components of the pipeline which change, but the pipeline itself remains global.
It's the same pipeline, no major overhaul.
I also have a change log. I also get the version from the change log and put it, I tag, etc. So all the paradigm, all the pipeline is exactly the same. You just have to adapt the tools which are used inside it to perform your checks.
Perfect. Well, Olivier, Laurent, thank you. That was a compelling talk. For the audience, please join us in the CI/CD Slack if you have more questions for Olivier and Laurent. They will be there. Gentlemen, have a great day. And now we will shift over to how to fail at threat modeling. With James Bohr from Bohr's Security Consultants.